Elias Vance, a man whose life had been meticulously built on the bedrock of structural integrity and engineering precision, had sought solace in Harmony Heights, a sprawling new development promising suburban bliss and architectural perfection. He'd envisioned quiet evenings on his perfectly manicured lawn, the gentle hum of contented neighbors, and the comforting predictability of a well-ordered community. His own house, a modern marvel of clean lines and expansive windows, was supposed to be his final, unshakable sanctuary after decades spent shoring up the world's crumbling infrastructure. Yet, it was within these very walls, in the quiet solitude of his retirement, that the first whisper of imperfection began to manifest. It started subtly, a hairline fracture, almost imperceptible, tracing a faint spiderweb pattern near the base of his garage wall. Elias, ever the professional, initially dismissed it as typical settling, a minor cosmetic blemish in a new build. He made a mental note to monitor it, a habit ingrained from years of inspecting foundations and stress points. But then came the sound, a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to emanate from deep within the earth itself, a rhythmic pulse that vibrated through the floorboards late at night, too deep and too consistent to be mere pipes or distant traffic. It was a sound that prickled the hairs on his arms, an ancient, unsettling rhythm that defied logical explanation. He began his quiet, almost obsessive, investigation, not as a homeowner, but as the seasoned engineer he was. He walked the perfectly paved streets of Harmony Heights, observing, scrutinizing. He noticed similar, almost invisible, fissures appearing on the facades of neighboring homes, tiny veins spreading across pristine stucco. He saw subtle, almost imperceptible dips in the perfectly level driveways, a slight, unnatural tilt too. A fence post here, a barely noticeable shift in a patio slab there. The patterns, once he started looking, were undeniable, forming a disturbing constellation of structural fatigue across the entire development. This wasn't settling. This was something far more systemic, far more sinister. Concern morphed into alarm, and Elias, armed with meticulous notes, photographs, and even rudimentary stress calculations, decided it was time to alert the Homeowners Association. He drafted a polite, professional email to the Harmony Heights HOA, detailing his observations and suggesting a comprehensive structural assessment. Their response was a generic, automated acknowledgement, followed by weeks of silence. He called their office, navigating a labyrinth in automated system only to be met with a perpetually busy signal or a dismissive receptionist who assured him, "All new construction settle." "Sir, it's perfectly normal." His frustration mounted. With each ignored email, each unreturned call, he escalated, sending certified letters, requesting formal meetings, citing building codes and potential liabilities. The HOA's replies, when they came, were curt, condescending, and increasingly accusatory. They implied he was overly zealous, perhaps even a nuisance, suggesting his concerns were unfounded and potentially damaging to property values. "Mr. Vance, we appreciate your vigilance," read one particularly infuriating email from the HOA president, "but our engineers have assured us that Harmony Heights is built to the highest standards. Your continued insistence on these flaws is becoming disruptive." They refused to send anyone to inspect, refused to acknowledge the growing evidence, and effectively stonewalled him at every turn. Elias felt a cold dread creeping in, not just from the structural integrity of his home, but from the chilling indifference of those meant to protect the community. He knew, with the certainty of a man who had built his life on facts, that something was terribly wrong. He could feel it in the subtle tremble of his own floorboards, hear it in the persistent, low thrumming that now seemed to resonate not just at night, but at odd hours of the day. Then came the night the thrumming intensified, escalating into a deep, guttural vibration that shook the very foundation of his house. Elias, jolted awake, rushed to the garage, where the hairline crack had now widened into a jagged fissure, a dark, gaping maw in the pristine wall. A faint, earthy smell, like damp soil and something ancient, wafted from it. He reached out, his fingers tracing the rough edges of the new crack, and felt an unnatural, profound cold emanating from within, a chill that seeped into his bones, far colder than any draft. As he stood there, his hand pressed against the frigid wall, the thrumming pulse through his palm, and a whisper, faint but distinct, seemed to rise from the depths of the earth, a sound that wasn't words, but a primal, mournful wail that resonated not in his ears, but directly in his mind. This was no mere structural flaw. This was a warning, a desperate cry from something buried deep beneath Harmony Heights, something the HOA had not only ignored, but had actively disturbed. The perfection of his suburban sanctuary had shattered, revealing an abyss of ancient secrets. Beneath his very feet, the primal wail that had resonated in Elias Vance's mind, a soundless scream from the earth itself, became a constant, low-frequency hum beneath Harmony Heights, a persistent tremor that rattled more than just his nerves. The jagged fissure in his garage wall, once a mere crack, now wept a dark, viscous moisture, its edges flaking away like diseased skin, revealing an unsettling depth beyond the concrete. Doors in his meticulously built home began to stick, then jammed completely, their frames warping as if under immense, unseen pressure. Water pipes, previously silent, groaned and shuddered before a sudden, violent burst in the laundry room flooded the floor, the water strangely cold and smelling faintly of damp earth, despite coming from the municipal supply. Elias, now operating on a razor's edge of sleep deprivation and escalating dread, understood that the structural flaws were no longer just flaws. They were symptoms, manifestations of a profound disturbance beneath the very fabric of the development. He tried again to contact the HOA, his voice hoarse with urgency, but their responses had hardened into outright threats. Mr. Vance, the HOA president, a steely-eyed woman named Brenda Sterling, had stated in a clipped, final tone over the phone, "Your continued harassment of our office and your baseless accusations are now considered a legal liability. Cease and desist, or we will be forced to take action." Their dismissiveness had curdled into outright hostility, a chilling wall of corporate indifference that left Elias feeling utterly isolated, trapped in a perfect suburban nightmare. He couldn't sleep. The low thrumming was now accompanied by faint, rhythmic scraping sounds, like something being dragged across rough stone, deep beneath his house. He would lie awake, listening, his mind racing, piecing together the anomalies, the cold spots that drifted through his living room, the way his dog, Buster, would whine and cower at certain corners of the house, staring intently at empty space, hackles raised. These weren't just the quirks of an old house settling. Harmony Heights was brand new. This was something else. Driven by a desperate need for answers that the HOA refused to provide, Elias decided to launch his own, far more rigorous, independent investigation. He wasn't just looking for structural defects anymore. He was looking for a ghost in the machine, a hidden history. He spent hours at the local public library, poring over microfilm newspaper archives, old county land records, and dusty historical society journals. He traced the land deeds back decades, then centuries, noting the changing names of owners, the shifting boundaries, the gradual encroachment of modernity upon what was once wilderness. Most of the records were mundane, but a few entries, buried within the brittle pages of an 18th century county ledger, caught his eye. Mentions of unclaimed burial plots and unconsecrated ground near a specific, unnamed elder's knoll, that seemed to correspond roughly to the elevated section where Harmony Heights now stood. These were vague, almost poetic terms, but they resonated with the unsettling feeling he'd been experiencing. His research led him to the town's oldest residents, a few grizzled octogenarians who remembered a time before the sprawling subdivisions, when the land was still wild and whispered about. He found Mrs. Gable, a sharp-witted woman in her late 90s who lived in a small, cluttered house on the outskirts of town, untouched by the new developments. She had a memory like a steel trap and a twinkle in her eye that suggested she knew more than she let on. When Elias cautiously brought up Harmony Heights, her smile faded. "Ah, that cursed land," she rasped, her voice thin but firm. "My grandmother used to tell stories. Before the war, before the big farms, that was the place where the old ones, the original people, laid their dead. Not just any dead, mind you, the ones they wanted to keep quiet. The ones with powerful spirits. They said if you disturbed that ground, the earth would weep, and the dead would walk restless." She spoke of strange lights, unexplained illnesses, and a series of unfortunate accidents that had plagued anyone who tried to build on or claim that specific patch of land over the centuries. She even mentioned a small, forgotten settlement that had mysteriously vanished in the late 1700s, its inhabitants simply disappearing without a trace, leaving behind only empty homes and a chilling silence. "They said the ground took them," she whispered, her eyes wide, "took them for disturbing the peace." Back in Harmony Heights, the unexplained phenomena were becoming harder to ignore, even for the most skeptical residents. Mrs. Peterson, Elias's next-door neighbor, a woman who prided herself on her pragmatism, confided in him, her face pale. "Elias, I know this sounds crazy, but my antique grandfather clock, it keeps chiming at 3 in the morning, every night, even when it's unwound, and sometimes I hear whispers, like a crowd talking, but it's just me and my cat." Another neighbor reported waking up to find all their family photos turned face down on the mantelpiece, with no sign of forced entry. Children in the development started having vivid, terrifying nightmares, drawing disturbing pictures of shadowy figures emerging from the ground. Pets, especially dogs, became agitated, barking incessantly at empty spaces or refusing to enter certain rooms. The low thrumming Elias heard was now occasionally audible to others, a faint, unsettling vibration that they dismissed as construction noise from a new phase of the development. But it was too deep, too rhythmic, too alive to be mere machinery. Elias knew better. He felt the ancient cold seeping from the garage wall, the strange earthy smell that now permeated his home, and the increasing frequency of the mournful, wordless wail in his mind. He was no longer just an engineer fighting a shoddy construction job. He was a man standing on the precipice of a terrifying truth, a truth whispered by the land itself, a truth that the HOA had buried, perhaps unknowingly, beneath the pristine facade of Harmony Heights. The loop was tightening, drawing him deeper into a history far older and more malevolent than he could have ever imagined. The whispers from Mrs. Gable, the unsettling sensations in his home, and the relentless, deep thrumming had driven Elias Vance to a new level of desperate resolve. His independent investigation, once a meticulous engineering pursuit, had morphed into an archaeological dig of forgotten truths. He returned to the library, not for building codes, but for local genealogical records, old church registers, and obscure historical society pamphlets. He cross-referenced the vague mentions of Elders Knoll with old land grants and colonial maps, painstakingly overlaying them with modern topographical surveys of Harmony Heights. It was a tedious, almost maddening process, but Elias, fueled by an inner certainty that he was on the verge of something monumental, pressed on. One afternoon, buried deep within a faded, handwritten ledger from the mid-1700s, he found it, a detailed, hand-drawn map of the original colonial settlement that once occupied the land now known as Harmony Heights. It depicted a small, tight-knit community, and crucially, a clearly marked section on the highest point, labeled in elegant, looping script as the Vance family resting place. Sacred ground, a jolt, cold and electric, shot through Elias Vance, his name, his family. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. This wasn't just an ancient burial ground, it was his ancient burial ground. His ancestors lay beneath these manicured lawns and pristine foundations. The sheer, horrifying irony of it, the personal desecration, sent a wave of nausea through him. He was not just a concerned resident, he was a descendant, a guardian, and now, an unwitting accomplice in the disturbance of his own lineage. He rushed back to Mrs. Gable, the old map clutched in his trembling hand. Her eyes, usually sharp, widened in recognition. The Vance place, she breathed, a flicker of fear in her gaze. They were the first, the ones who settled this valley. They kept the old ways, respected the land. My grandmother said they buried their dead deep, with ceremonies, to keep the spirits at peace. They knew the power of that ground, she then recounted a chilling family tale, passed down through generations, of a sacred pact the Vances had made with the land's original inhabitants, a promise to honor the burial sites, to never disturb the slumber of those interred there. A curse, she said, would befall any who broke that pact, a slow, insidious decay that would begin with the earth itself, then spread to the structures built upon it, and finally, to the lives of those who profited from the desecration. The earth will weep, and the dead will walk restless, she repeated, her voice a low, prophetic drone, and those who ignore the warnings will be swallowed whole. Elias felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. The structural flaws, the strange sounds, the inexplicable phenomena, they weren't random. They were the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, the land's agonizing protest against the violation. Armed with this newfound, terrifying knowledge, Elias returned to Harmony Heights, seeing his home, his street, the entire development through a new, horrifying lens. The cracks in the walls were not just cracks. They were the land's wounds, bleeding moisture and cold. The persistent thrumming was not just a vibration. It was the restless murmur of his ancestors, disturbed from their eternal sleep. He began to notice how the most severe structural damage seemed to cluster around specific areas, correlating eerily with the Vance family resting place marked on the old map. A massive sinkhole had recently opened up in Mrs. Peterson's backyard, directly over what the map indicated was a cluster of family graves. The ground around it was unstable, constantly shifting, and a foul, earthy odor now permanently clung to the air in that section of the development. Inside Mrs. Peterson's house, the unexplained phenomena had escalated. Objects would fly off shelves, shadowy figures were seen flitting in peripheral vision, and the temperature would drop precipitously in certain rooms, leaving a bone-chilling cold that no heating system could combat. Elias himself experienced a terrifying escalation as he stood in his garage, staring at the ever-widening fissure. The mournful wail in his mind intensified, accompanied by fleeting, spectral images, a glimpse of a gaunt, angry face, a flash of ancient clothing, a hand reaching out from the darkness. He felt a profound sense of guilt, a crushing weight of ancestral responsibility. His family had made a promise, and now, generations later, it was being broken, and he, Elias Vance, was living on the very ground where his kin were being desecrated. The HOA's dismissals were no longer just frustrating, they were an act of profound, almost cosmic, ignorance. They had not only ignored structural warnings, they had ignored the very soul of the land, awakening something ancient and vengeful. The loop was no longer just about his house. It was about his bloodline, a haunting legacy demanding justice. Armed with the irrefutable evidence of the ancient map, his meticulously researched genealogical records, the chilling corroboration from Mrs. Gable, and his own terrifying personal experiences, Elias Vance walked into the Harmony Heights HOA Board meeting like a man possessed by a singular, righteous fury. The air in the sterile conference room, usually thick with the scent of stale coffee and corporate apathy, crackled with an unspoken tension as he laid out his findings. He presented the faded, hand-drawn map, pointing to the Vance family resting place, then overlaid it with a modern satellite image of Harmony Heights, showing how the development's very heart sat squarely atop the sacred ground. He detailed the escalating structural flaws, the weeping cracks, the shifting foundations, the inexplicable sinkholes, and then, with a voice trembling not from fear, but from conviction, he recounted the strange cold spots, the disembodied whispers, the spectral glimpses, and the persistent, mournful thrumming that now permeated the very earth beneath their feet. Brenda Sterling, the HOA president, a woman whose composure was usually as unyielding as concrete, initially scoffed, her lips thin with disdain. "Mr. Vance, this is preposterous. Are you suggesting our multi-million-dollar development is built on ... ghosts?" Her initial dismissal quickly morphed into outright hostility as Elias continued, presenting his family lineage, proving his direct ancestral link to the desecrated land. The other board members, a collection of local businessmen and real estate investors, shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning alarm. One, a portly developer named Marcus Thorne, whose company had spearheaded Harmony Heights, turned a sickly shade of gray. "This is slander, Mr. Vance, defamation. We'll see you into oblivion," he blustered, his voice cracking. But Elias stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't slander, Mr. Thorne. This is the truth. Your negligence, your greed, has disturbed something ancient, something powerful. And now, it's fighting back." The HOA's desperation became palpable. They tried every tactic. First, outright denial, then attempts to discredit Elias, implying he was mentally unstable, a grieving old man clinging to fantasies. They offered him a substantial sum of money, a generous settlement for his distress, contingent on his silence and a signed non-disclosure agreement. "Think of your retirement, Mr. Vance," Brenda Sterling purred, her voice a silken threat. "A quiet life, far away from all this ... unpleasantness." Elias, however, saw through their thinly veiled bribe. "You can't buy off the dead," he retorted, his voice low and dangerous. When money failed, they resorted to legal threats, sending him official cease and desist letters, threatening injunctions, and even hinting at criminal charges for inciting panic and property devaluation. They brought in their own experts, hastily arranged engineers, who produced reports declaring the development structurally sound and dismissing Elias's findings as anomalies. They even started a smear campaign within the community, subtly spreading rumors that Elias was a disgruntled eccentric, a troublemaker. Elias felt the walls closing in, the full weight of their corporate power pressing down on him. He knew they would stop at nothing to bury the truth, just as they had buried his ancestors. But the thought of his family, restless beneath the concrete, the increasing terror of his neighbors, and the undeniable, escalating signs of the land's fury, solidified his resolve. He couldn't be silenced. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. He made a decision that would irrevocably alter the fate of Harmony Heights. He compiled all his evidence, the maps, the genealogical records, the photos of the escalating damage, even audio recordings of the deep thrumming and faint whispers he'd managed to capture, and anonymously leaked it to a local investigative journalist known for her tenacity, Sarah Jenkins. He also created an anonymous social media account, posting snippets of his findings, cryptic warnings, and photos of the worsening cracks, building a quiet online following of concerned residents. The journalist, intrigued by the sheer volume and specificity of the data, began her own discreet investigation. The public revelation came not with a bang, but with a chilling, slow burn. Sarah Jenkins is exposed, initially a series of online articles, then a segment on the local news, meticulously laid out Elias's evidence, albeit without revealing his identity at first. The initial reaction from the residents of Harmony Heights was a mix of shock, disbelief, and a terrifying recognition. Many had experienced their own unexplained phenomena: the strange smells, the cold spots, the unsettling dreams that had dismissed them, too afraid to voice their fears. Now, seeing Elias's evidence, their individual anxieties coalesced into a collective dread. The HOA immediately went into damage control, issuing furious denials, threatening legal action against the news outlet, and calling emergency resident meetings where they tried to discredit the reports as sensationalist journalism. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, watered by the growing fear. Then, Elias, seeing the HOA's continued defiance, made his final, dramatic move. He revealed himself at a packed, heated HOA meeting, televised live by the local news. He stood before the furious board and the terrified residents, holding up the original Vance family map. "This land," he declared, his voice resonating with a newfound authority, "is not yours to build on. It belongs to the dead. My dead." He then recounted his full story, from the first crack to the spectral visions, his personal connection adding an undeniable, heartbreaking weight to his claims. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by shouts of anger and fear. Residents, who had previously been skeptical, now openly wept, their own unspoken fears confirmed. The loop of escalating events intensified with terrifying speed. As Elias spoke, a sudden, violent tremor shook the building, far stronger than anything before. Lights flickered, plaster rained down from the ceiling, and a massive, sickening crack split the conference room wall, revealing not just concrete, but dark, damp earth beneath, oozing a foul, ancient smell. Outside, across Harmony Heights, the ground began to visibly heave and groan. New, enormous sinkholes erupted in lawns, swallowing trees and cars whole. Houses twisted on their foundations, windows shattered, and the air filled with the mournful, collective wail Elias had only heard. In his mind, now audible to everyone, a symphony of ancient anguish and rage. The perfect suburban dream had shattered, revealing the nightmare beneath, a nightmare unleashed by ignorance and greed. And now, the land itself was demanding its reckoning. The earth's wail, a guttural roar that erupted from beneath Harmony Heights during Elias Vance's televised revelation, ripped through the fabric of suburban tranquility, shattering not just concrete and glass, but the collective illusion of safety. Panic erupted in the HOA meeting hall, a stampede of terrified residents, scrambling over overturned chairs, their screams mingling with the groaning of the building as it visibly shifted. Outside, the scene was apocalyptic, perfectly manicured. Lawns buckled and tore, revealing dark, wet earth beneath. Houses groaned and twisted, their foundations failing, some sliding into newly formed, gaping sinkholes that swallowed cars whole. The air thickened with dust, the acrid smell of ruptured gas lines, and that pervasive, ancient scent of disturbed soil. Emergency services, initially overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the disaster, quickly declared Harmony Heights a no-go zone, initiating a mass evacuation. Residents fled in droves, leaving behind not just their possessions, but the shattered remnants of their suburban dreams, their faces etched with a mixture of terror, confusion, and a dawning, horrified understanding of Elias Vance's impossible truth. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The news footage of the collapsing development, juxtaposed with Elias's calm, resolute declaration about the ancient burial ground, went viral, igniting a national media frenzy. Investigative journalists swarmed the perimeter of Harmony Heights, unearthing every detail of the HOA's dismissals, the developer's shady past, and the shocking historical revelation. Lawsuits piled up like fallen debris. A tsunami of class action suits from displaced residents demanding compensation. Criminal investigations into negligence and fraud were launched, and public outcry reached a fever pitch. Brenda Sterling, the unyielding HOA president, and Marcus Thorne, the blustering developer, found themselves at the epicenter of a public crucifixion. Their carefully constructed lives of power and profit crumbled with the very foundations of Harmony Heights. Sterling, once so composed, was seen on national television, haggard and defiant, attempting to deflect blame, but her words were drowned out by the undeniable images of destruction and Elias's haunting testimony. Thorne, facing multiple indictments, attempted to flee the country, but was apprehended at a private airstrip, his empire reduced to rubble, his name synonymous with greed and desecration. Their companies faced bankruptcy, their reputations irrevocably ruined, their attempts to suppress the truth ultimately leading to their spectacular downfall. The loop of human arrogance and its inevitable consequence had come full circle, swallowing those who had ignored the earth's warnings. The residents of Harmony Heights, however, faced a more complex and enduring tragedy. Displaced, many lost everything. Initial anger, fueled by fear and confusion, was directed at everyone: the HOA, the developers, and even, initially, Elias. Some blamed him for causing the panic, for cursing their homes with his stories. But, as the geological surveys confirmed the unprecedented instability of the land, as archaeologists, brought in by federal agencies, began to uncover ancient artifacts and human remains beneath the fractured concrete, the truth became undeniable. The earth itself was rejecting the development. The mournful wail, once only heard by Elias, was now reportedly heard by others, a faint, lingering echo in the wind that swept through the abandoned streets. The residents, forced to confront the chilling reality, slowly began to understand. Their anger shifted, settling squarely on the developers and the HOA who had knowingly, or unknowingly, built on forbidden ground. Support groups formed, shared experiences of the strange phenomena they had dismissed, and a quiet, somber respect for Elias Vance began to grow. He was no longer just the troublemaker. He was the prophet, the one who had seen the truth when everyone else was blind. Elias Vance, however, found no solace in vindication. The ordeal had taken a profound toll. He was hailed by some as a hero, a whistleblower who had saved countless lives, but he felt more like a reluctant medium, burdened by the voices of the past. His own home, now a skeletal ruin, was a constant reminder of the desecration. He spent his days at the perimeter of the fenced-off development, watching as nature began its slow, relentless reclamation. Weeds choked the cracked pavement, wild grasses sprouted through shattered driveways, and the sinkholes, once gaping wounds, slowly transformed into murky, stagnant ponds, reflecting the gray sky. The land, having expelled its invaders, was beginning to heal itself, albeit with a permanent scar. Elias felt an unshakable connection to this scarred earth, a profound sense of ancestral duty. He became a quiet advocate for the preservation of the site, ensuring that the unearthed remains were respectfully reinterred, and that the Vance family resting place would finally be left undisturbed. He never rebuilt, choosing instead a small, unassuming cabin far from any new development, but the thrumming, the faint, ancient wail, never truly left him. It was no longer a sound of anger, but a low, persistent hum of remembrance, a constant reminder of the pact broken and the price paid. The loop of human ambition and nature's ancient power had found a fragile equilibrium. Harmony Heights remained, a ghost town, a stark monument to a truth ignored, its silent, crumbling structures serving as a perpetual warning, a place where the earth had indeed wept, and the dead had walked, ensuring that their sacred slumber would never again be disturbed.